She stood alone on the side of a highway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on nothing. It was just after midnight. The flash of a phone camera lit the dark. That single photograph would soon be broadcast across a nation and carved into history. At that moment, 18-year-old Debanhi Escobar was still alive. 13 days later, she was found in a motel cistern, bloated, bruised, and broken. But this wasn't a case of a runaway. This wasn't a misstep. This wasn't a girl who got lost. No, this was something deeper, something colder. It started with a party, a ride home, an argument, and then silence. Her friends said they didn't know what happened. The driver who left her on the highway said she acted strange. Police said it was an accident. And her father? He said nothing. Not at first. He simply held the photo, the one the driver sent him, the one the world would later call the moment Mexico changed. Because that photo, a teenage girl standing alone at night, was only the beginning of what would become one of the most disturbing stories Latin America had ever seen. They said she walked alone toward the motel. That cameras showed her entering, but not leaving. Then no one followed. That she must have fallen. That her death was a tragic accident. But if it was an accident, why was she found inside a sealed cistern with blunt force trauma to the head? Why did the first autopsy get it so wrong? And why, after 2 weeks of national protests, missing footage, conflicting stories, and one devastated father, was there still no one arrested? This isn't just a mystery. It's a mirror, and what it reflects. About justice, about power, about how quickly girls are forgotten. Will leave you shaken. Stay with me, because by the time this story ends, you'll understand why a single photo, one night, one highway, one girl, shook an entire nation to its knees. It was April 8th, 2022. Debanhi Susana Escobar Basildua left her home in Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, Mexico, just like any other teenager ready for a night out. She was 18, a law student, quiet but bright. She loved poetry, dancing, and believed in fairness. Maybe that's why she wanted to study law. That night, she went to a party with 2 girls she trusted. They weren't her best friends, but they had gone out together before. The plan was simple: have a few drinks, take photos, laugh a little, be home before dawn. But something shifted. At around 1 a.m., witnesses say Debanhi began acting strangely. There were whispers of a disagreement, maybe with her friends, maybe with someone else at the party. Reports conflict, timelines blur. But one thing's certain: the 2 girls she arrived with left her behind. Instead, they called a trusted contact, someone who worked as a rideshare driver for the group. His name hasn't been forgotten, and his role, even less so. That man picked Debanhi up. That man took her photo. That man dropped her on the side of the highway. And that man was the last confirmed person to see her alive. He claimed she grew agitated, that she accused him of touching her, that he pulled over and told her to get out. Then he snapped the now infamous picture, Debanhi standing alone, with her arms crossed, mid-pavement under dim, orange light. And he sent it to her friends, to her parents, to the world. It was meant to prove he'd left her safely. Instead, it became the symbol of something much darker. By 3 a.m., Debanhi's phone went silent. No messages, no calls, just void. For the next 13 days, her father Mario and her mother Dolores searched every corner of Nuevo Leon. The police called it a disappearance. Volunteers walked ditches. Drones scanned rooftops. And every reporter, every activist, every woman who had ever felt unsafe in her own neighborhood started watching. Not because they thought she was dead, but because they were all terrified she was still out there, somewhere they might end up too. 13 days passed. The scent of the city changed, soured by the tension, the unanswered questions, the quiet horror creeping beneath each headline. Posters with Debanhi's face were taped to lampposts, gas station doors, and bus stops. Her father Mario didn't sleep. He walked street after street, asking the same question to people who didn't know how to answer. Have you seen my daughter? But the truth? She was never far. Just 100 feet from where she was last seen stood the Nueva Castilla Motel, a pale, aging building, fenced in, barbed wire, security cameras, locked gates, and behind the main structure, 3 disused water cisterns. Covered. Abandoned. Supposedly sealed. On April 21st, search teams returned to the motel for a third time. This time, they opened the cisterns. Inside one of them, they found a swollen body floating face down in the water. The clothes matched. The hair. The shoes. It was her. The news broke like a siren across the country. Debanhi Escobar found. But the relief didn't come. Only more confusion. More rage. Because they had searched that motel before. Multiple times. And found nothing. How could her body be inside a cistern that had already been examined? How could she be so close, yet somehow invisible? The initial autopsy was quick to speak. Officials announced she had slipped and fallen, that she died from blunt force trauma after hitting her head. An accident. End of story. But Mario didn't accept that. He didn't just lose a daughter. He lost trust. He commissioned a second autopsy. Independent. Brutal. Honest. And what it revealed burned everything down. This wasn't a fall. This was murder. The report confirmed what everyone feared. Debanhi had suffered a deep cranial contusion caused by a heavy object. There were signs of sexual abuse. There was no water in her lungs, which meant she was already dead before she ever touched the cistern. That's when the story changed. From missing girl to murdered daughter. From accident to femicide. And the real question lit up across Mexico. Who put her there? The pressure exploded overnight. News vans lined the road outside the Nueva Castilla motel. Protesters gathered at the gates with candles, signs, and chants that echoed down the highway. No fue an accident. It wasn't an accident, because if she didn't fall, someone placed her there. The footage from the motel was released in fragments, grainy clips from scattered cameras. In one, Debanhi can be seen walking erratically near the property wall. Another shows her entering the compound. But that's where the trail ends. She was never seen leaving. Authorities claimed there was no evidence of another person, that she wandered in alone, that she somehow scaled a barrier, walked deep into the motel's restricted zone, climbed into a cistern, and died. But nothing about that made sense. Why were 2 full searches unable to find her if she'd been there the entire time? Why were her belongings, her purse, her phone, never recovered? And why did the motel staff say they hadn't seen or heard anything for 13 days? Mario Escobar demanded answers, and the world demanded them with him. 2 state prosecutors were removed from the case for errors and omissions. The Nuevo Leon governor invited federal investigators to take over. They ordered a third autopsy conducted by the nation's top forensic experts. That final report confirmed blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with violent impact. It found no signs of drowning, no bruises on her hands or legs to indicate a fall, no broken nails, no water in her lungs, no scrapes suggesting she had climbed or slipped into the tank. It was the clearest evidence yet. Debanhi Escobar had been killed, and someone had staged the scene. Still, no arrests, no suspect, no charges, only theories that she'd been followed, that someone in the motel knew more than they were saying, that the camera footage was tampered with, that the driver's role wasn't as innocent as it seemed. So many pieces, but no one putting them together. Her father said it best. They planted her like a piece of trash. The silence from officials became its own kind of noise. Behind closed doors, files were misplaced. Surveillance footage was unavailable. Interviews with key staff went undocumented. Debanhi's parents were told to wait again. Meanwhile, the public had already made up its mind. They weren't just watching a case. They were watching a cover-up unfold in real time. Across Mexico, protests grew louder. Justicia para Debanhi was spray-painted on courthouse walls. Women marched through city centers in purple bandanas, chanting her name. What had started as grief became fury. Because Debanhi wasn't the only one. She was one name among thousands. Women who vanished without a trace, who were found dead in alleys, fields, drainage canals. In a country where 10 women a day are murdered, her story was tragically familiar. But that photo, her standing alone in defiance, turned her into something more. A symbol of what happens when institutions fail, when violence is dismissed, when evidence is buried and parents are left to dig for truth with their bare hands. Mario Escobar refused to let her fade. He held press conferences. He confronted state officials. He rejected every attempt to call her death an accident. And when international media came knocking, he opened the door and showed them everything. The photos, the messages, the inconsistencies. He even released footage the authorities never mentioned. Clips of Debanhi walking erratically toward the motel fence. A few seconds later, she disappears from view. Then nothing. Hours of footage missing. Authorities claimed she was alone. But Mario asked the one question that still hangs in the air. If she was alone, who killed her? The driver was questioned again. The motel staff re-interviewed. The motel owners went silent. No one could explain how she entered a sealed area, ended up in a covered cistern, and was missed during 2 full searches. The longer the case dragged, the more it started to rot, like the very system that failed her. The case file grew thicker, but the truth? Still buried. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, one family waited for the justice they were never supposed to receive. July 2022. 3 months had passed. The official story had shifted so many times, it barely resembled truth. First, it was an accident. Then, maybe suicide. Then, murder with unknown circumstances. But still no arrests. No charges. No one behind bars. And yet, the facts were now impossible to ignore. The third autopsy, ordered by the federal government, confirmed what Debanhi's father had been saying since day one. This was a homicide. A violent, deliberate killing. Cause of death? Asphyxiation due to head trauma. Time of death? Just hours after she vanished. The photos from the autopsy were leaked online. Bruises, a fractured skull, a body to decompose for a 13-day-old death, meaning she may have been moved, or hidden, or refrigerated. Theories erupted that she had never actually died at the motel, that she was held somewhere, that she had been assaulted, killed, then planted in the cistern as a last resort, meant to mislead, to close the case, to silence the outrage. Meanwhile, 2 low-level officials in the Nuevo Leon Attorney General's office were quietly removed. No charges, no public explanation, just gone, like Debanhi had been at first. The motel owner released a statement saying they had fully cooperated. The driver claimed again he did nothing wrong. And the cameras? No explanation for the missing time gaps. No footage of anyone entering or leaving the cistern area. And still, no suspects. Reporters began to whisper what everyone feared, that someone powerful was involved, that someone was being protected. And while the headlines slowed, her father didn't. He became her voice, her shadow, her weapon. In interview after interview, he repeated one line like a vow. They murder my daughter, and I will not stop. Debanhi Escobar was no longer a missing person. She was no longer a blurred CCTV image. She had become a spark, and in a country drowning in silence. A spark was the most dangerous thing of all. The motel sits quiet now. No guests, no cameras, no answers, just echoes. After all the headlines faded and the protests slowed, what remained was a grieving family staring down a wall of silence. An investigation wrapped in contradictions, tied off with red tape. The case was officially classified as femicide, one of the most severe criminal designations under Mexican law. But even that title was hollow without justice. Federal authorities held press conferences with carefully chosen words. They said they were still reviewing evidence, still interviewing witnesses, still analyzing the timeline. But it's hard to analyze something you're no longer looking for. Because no one was arrested, no one was charged, and Debanhi's parents were never even told who was under investigation. Instead, they received something else, a media circus. Streaming platforms released dramatized docuseries about her death. Talk shows debated theories like gossip. A documentary titled Todas. Debanhi, Una Historia de Reeds launched in early 2025 without the family's consent, turning their grief into content. Her parents, outraged, denounced the filmmakers. They said her story had been hijacked, turned into entertainment, reduced to shadows and sound bites. Meanwhile, her name continued to live, in hashtags, in murals, in whispered fears. Debanhi's mother could no longer sleep in her room. Her father left his job to dedicate every hour to fighting the system that buried her. He visits the spot where her body was found nearly every week, brings flowers, talks to her, and every time he asks the same question. Why her? Because Debanhi Escobar wasn't a runaway. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't unlucky. She was careful. She was bright. And she was left alone at 4 a.m. by a man who claimed to protect her. And that's the part no one can forget. It wasn't just the tragedy. It was the betrayal. By the system. By those around her. By silence. And yet, through all that darkness, one family kept the story alive. She should have come home that night. She should have thrown her shoes in the corner of her room, kicked off her earrings, texted her friend something stupid, and fallen asleep under a blanket that smelled like fabric softener in peace. Instead, her last known moment was captured in a photo, standing alone in the dark on the side of a road, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. That image will haunt Mexico for decades, not just because of how it ended, but because of how familiar it felt. Debanhi Escobar became a name the world whispered in anger and grief, a symbol carved from absence, a girl who wanted to study law and became the evidence. Her death exposed cracks that were already there, deep, wide, and ignored. A justice system that classifies murder as accident, cameras that record everything except the truth, people who watch but do not act, and a silence so loud it can bury the living. But her story didn't stay buried. Because of her father, because of her mother, because of the women who took to the streets with candles and signs, because of the rage that built behind every no comment, every stalled report, every unanswered call. Debanhi wasn't the first. She may not be the last, but she was the one who made the world stop scrolling, long enough to feel the weight of all the ones we lost. So ask yourself this: what do we do when the system meant to protect us becomes the one we fear? When a ride home turns into a final destination? And when a girl is left in the dark? Who is supposed to turn the lights back on? A routine party, a highway, a silence that still hasn't broken. Her name was Debanhi Escobar, and the world will not forget her. If this story shook you, subscribe, because we are not done asking questions, and we are not done demanding answers.